channel, 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 and welcome back, my skeletons, my skeletons, my skeletons, my skeletons. Welcome to today's segment, Tuesday readings. Tuesday was a thin, determined line. Read her mind. Tell me whether or not I even have a remote chance with her. Vlad couldn't believe what he was hearing. Reading the mind of hot girls at the mall was one thing, but sneaking around in Melissa's private thoughts just to give Henry an edge Henry didn't need at all with any other girl at Bathory High, just seemed wrong. He knew Henry only asked out of desperation, but that still didn't make it right. He shook his head. I can't do that, man. Sorry. Henry's face flushed. His voice shook slightly. What good are all these vampiric powers if you can't even help out a friend? I'm not saying no to be a jerk. I just don't feel right about traipsing around inside Melissa's head. He looked at Henry inside. I'm sorry, I just can't. You're so a hypocrite. No, I just know right from wrong. Henry dropped his gaze, defeated. Several moments of awkward, tense silence passed, until finally he spoke, giving way to a drastic subject change. Have you had any luck reaching Otis? Vlad watched him for a moment. Resisting the temptation to peek into his friend's thoughts, Vlad toyed absently with the bolt on the left side of his neck. Not yet. It's weird. I haven't been able to reach him since he left town. Henry shrugged, not looking completely invested in the conversation. Maybe it's a distant thing. Might be. I mean, I had no problem with distance in the training room in Siberia, but outside that room, well, it's harder to reach people sometimes. Vlad furrowed his brow. sweet, Vlad. Henry's lucky to have you for a friend, and I'm lucky too. Why? Because I get to do this. She leaned close and brushed her lips against his cheek. Vlad's skin warmed at her touch. He smiled and gave her hand a squeeze back. Then he reached up and gently whipped the green makeup from her lips with his sleeve. I'm the lucky one. After exchanging blushing glances, they headed up the steps together and immersed themselves in Matthew's living room turned graveyard, complete with moss-covered tombstones and eerie fog. The room wasn't as crowded as last year, and as they moved through it, Vlad realized that most of the guests were heading downstairs. He and Meredith made their way to the basement, which had been decorated like some kind of medieval torture room. There was even a robotic half-dead mutant strapped to the stretching rack that screamed every time somebody walked by. Vlad grinned. Now this was a party. The music was pretty loud, mostly top 40 stuff. Matthew's dad manned the stereo, just like a Hawaiian tourist. Vlad had seen him wearing that same shirt all through last summer. It wasn't so much a costume as an excuse to don his immensely ugly orange, teal, and yellow flowered shirt. Matthew's mom was dressed like Glinda from The Wizard of Oz. She was busy force-feeding cupcakes to any guest that came within a 4-foot radius of the buffet, but not before asking them in a shrill voice if they were a good witch or a bad witch. Matthew, understandably, kept to the other side of the room and pretended they weren't related. Vlad was shaking his head at the scene in front of him when he suddenly realized he was no longer holding Meredith's hand and that there was a girlish squeal fest going on to his right. He looked over at Meredith, who was hugging Melissa and jumping up and down a little. Melissa was dressed as a fairy, complete with large, sparkly wings, which smacked Mike Brennan in the face as Melissa bounced in girlish glee. Vlad couldn't help but frown. Mike wasn't wearing a costume. In fact, as he looked around, he saw that just a handful of guys were dressed up as anything this year. And while Vlad certainly enjoyed donning a costume and having fun, it was a lot better when everyone else did it too. He nodded at Mike, and to his satisfaction, a glint of jealousy flashed in Mike's eyes as he pointed to Vlad's outfit. That is one sweet costume, Vlad. How'd you convince your aunt that you weren't too old to dress up? Vlad smiled, relaxing some. So that's why Mike wasn't wearing a costume. Nellie's pretty cool about that kind of thing, actually. She was the one who found the rubber bolts for me. Mike groaned. My parents are so lame. I've been arguing with them for weeks about whether or not dressing up for Halloween is something reserved for little kids. You lost, huh? Mike nodded sullenly. I wanted to come as the crypt keeper. Vlad flicked a glance at Glinda and back. Well, if you're interested, I'm pretty sure Matthew's mom has a ton of old costumes lying around. I mean, every year they go all out, you know. I bet she let you borrow one. Mike bit his lip, watching Matthew's mom as she waved her light up wand over a fresh batch of cookies. As she did so, she said, "There's no place like home." He groaned, but the costume must have been pretty important to him, since he muttered that he'd be right back across the room toward the mound of pink crinoline that was Matthew's mom. Meredith and Melissa stopped squealing at last, and Vlad forced a smile. Hey, Melissa, how's it going? Melissa's smile was warm but guarded. I'm good, Vlad. Just you and Meredith tonight. Vlad's insides twitched a little. If you're asking whether or not Henry is here, no. He made other plans. To Vlad's dismay, she visibly relaxed. Meredith started asking her about her hair or something. Vlad wasn't listening any longer. Instead, he crossed the room to the punch bowl. Even drinking sugary stuff that wouldn't alleviate his thirst was better than standing around listening to Melissa badmouth his best friend. After all, what exactly was her problem with Henry anyway? So he made out with a lot of girls, so he never really had a serious girlfriend, despite tons of dates. It didn't make him a bad person. On the other hand, Vlad wasn't entirely convinced that Henry's intentions were honorable. What if the only reason Henry wanted to go out with Melissa so badly was because she didn't want to have anything to do with him? Maybe it was a clear case of forbidden fruit. Or not. Vlad was pretty confused about the entire situation. hibiscus tree to his left shook as someone bumped it from the other side. A girl's voice, one Vlad didn't instantly recognize, shook with laughter. Did you see him? I mean, talk about a loser. Another girl snorted with derision. Yeah, I don't know what she sees in him. One thing's for sure, she's scraping the bottom of the social barrel. She's scraping the bottom of the social barrel by even being seen in public with a guy like that. Vlad squirmed in his seat, overwhelmed by empathy for whoever the two girls were talking about. He ran the tip of his tongue over his fangs, which had shrunk back into his gums almost completely. He was beginning to stand when he heard one of the bottomless girls say, I know. I mean, Vlad, Todd, seriously. Is she part of the dork outreach program or what? Vlad sank back in his seat. He was tempted to leap up and defend himself, to say that maybe Meredith thought he was sweet. She told him that a number of times, that he wasn't like other boys, couldn't argue with that, and that he was a great kisser, something that sent Vlad nearly floating up to the ceiling after hearing. But instead he listened, wanting to know just what the other guests at the party really thought of him. I bet she's just trying to make Henry McMillan jealous. It's been obvious for years now that she likes Henry. Yeah, but Henry's not exactly a challenge. Then the girl squealed. Oh my god, I know why she's dating him. Together they voiced a single word, one that Vlad knew would haunt him for the rest of his life. Pity. Vlad sank deeper into the couch cushions. Suddenly he wished he'd followed Henry's lead and stayed home. Did you see him during the limbo contest? He has no idea that everyone's laughing at him, not with him. What a geek. The girl's voice trailed off as she said, Hey, let's go get some punch. I'm thirsty. Vlad remained on the couch for a good long time. Finally, he reached up and removed the rubber bolts from his neck and the fake scar from his forehead. He rubbed away the makeup onto his sleeve, staining it green, and stood. The room around him was very full, and people were laughing, dancing, playing all sorts of games. Maybe they were playing more games than he'd realized. Vlad felt like he was moving in slow motion as he crossed the room and slipped up the stairs. He stepped out the back door, closing it quietly behind him. There was no reason for him to be here. He'd never be accepted anyway. He was a loser in a sea of winners, a complete and total freak, and a pretty girlfriend and a couple of laughs would never change that. He crossed the yard, aiming for the sidewalk, when the back door flung open behind him. He glanced over his shoulder at a breathless Meredith and paused, but didn't speak. Meredith's bottom lip trembled. Weren't you even going to tell me you were leaving? Vlad shrugged. He still felt like he was moving in slow motion, around her, and they danced. Her hair smelled like lilac. Her skin felt like silk, and Vlad was dangerously aware of how close she was to him. His heart swelled up like a balloon until Vlad thought it might burst. In his mind's eye, they were dancing together on the moonlit windows walk of his old house, just as he'd seen his parents do countless times before. A small tear escaped his closed eyes, and Vlad squeezed Meredith closer. It wasn't the memory of his parents that had brought on his tears. It was the realization that he loved Meredith, really loved her, deeply and truly. He loved her, and he would do anything in his power to make her happy and keep her safe. The song ended, and they lingered there in quiet closeness for a while. A brisk breeze swept over them, and they both shivered, parting at last. Meredith reached out and took his hand in hers. "How about I walk you home?" Vlad smiled. "I'd like that." Never mind the fact that it was the polite thing for him to walk her home, or that they'd have to pass her house to get to Vlad's. Meredith's dad had a prime dislike of Vlad going on, so whenever possible, she kept her dad out of the mix. Besides, it would mean more time together. They moved down the street, hand in hand, slinking past Meredith's house. The walk was blissfully eddy-free. Only too soon they came to stand on Ellie's front porch. Vlad exchanged shy smiles with Meredith, the way they always did right before they kissed. Vlad could feel the moment coming, his entire body warming with sweet anticipation. Then he leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. She tasted like sugar, spice, and everything nice, with a side of strawberry lip balm. When he pulled away at last, she slipped her arms around him, hugging him close. Vlad nuzzled her neck, marveling at how sweet she smelled. So sweet, you could almost taste it. "Vladimir," Nellie's voice, high-pitched and fearful, rang out into the night. She was standing in the open doorway, her eyes wide, an afghan wrapped around her shoulders. With a horrific shock, Vlad realized that his mouth was open, his fangs elongated, poised over the delicious-looking blue vein in Meredith's neck. He snapped his mouth shut and stepped back. He had almost bitten her. He'd almost fed